Welcome to Flex Perspectives, where I interview the thought leaders, innovators, and executives shaping the future of flexible work. Flex Perspectives is brought to you by the Flex Index, the world's most robust source for full-time, hybrid, and remote work requirements. The Flex Index represents more than 4,500 companies, 30,000 office locations, and 100 million people. It's a great place to start if you're looking for your next flexible work career opportunity. Today, my guest is Kay Sargent. Kay is the director of the Global Workplace Practice at HOK, the largest US-based architecture engineering firm. Today, we'll discuss why Kay believes this is a Kodak moment for corporate real estate. Kay shares what will separate the winners from the losers and provide actionable recommendations for how companies can get more nimble to adapt to a rapidly changing work environment. Kay, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. So over the course of your career, one of the things I found interesting is you've had a front row seat to the evolution of design and office in a number of different ways. How did you get started in this field in the first place?
Well, listen, you're going to have to go back way, way far for that because I've been a practicing designer for 38 years. But I think when I was probably about 10 years old, I was drawing plans for my parents' friends at their dinner parties that they would be having. And then I really never knew interior design was a profession, but I took a drafting class in high school, loved it, and then went into design and kind of never turned back. Started working in the profession when I was 20. So I've been doing it for a long time now.
And tell me about some of the stops on the way and how did you end up finding your way to HOK eventually?
It has been an interesting journey. I started at a smaller firm, did a lot of large government projects and master plans. I was involved when ADA first came out, which is way over 30 years ago, and started to do a lot of security assessments and ADA assessments. Got involved in a lot of government projects because I live in Washington, D.C., and so that naturally took me down a route and started to do a lot of security assessments and security planning and design, and then really evolved into developing workplace strategies for our clients and how do we really justify and blend the art and the science of design, and then just kind of continued from there. I think my greatest attribute that has sustained me is curiosity and never being bored and always finding some new avenue to kind of dive into and to explore.
It's so interesting that you come from a somewhat security-oriented background or angle to thinking about this. Has that influenced, do you think, the way you think about design or the way your career evolved when it comes to thinking about the workplace?
Well, I will say this. I think that every single decision that we make has an impact on how people feel, on how safe we are, on just every single aspect. And for years, I actually got paid for a while to try to break into government buildings because I had to do security assessments. And I was involved in several really high profile projects. I've done a lot of recovery and assessments after some disasters that we've had in this country. And it's kind of an onerous thing, I have to tell you, when you're thinking about all of these different scenarios. But the way that we're designing our spaces really does have an impact. And I think early on in my career, I decided I don't think we should be living in fortified places, but they have to be secure and we have to design intelligently from the beginning. And that goes for everything from sustainability, from how people are working, from how secure we are. Every single aspect is impacted by the decisions that we're making when we're designing spaces.
In some ways, you were so far ahead on the how do we feel when we're in the office and what are the things, whether it be visually or interior or security wise, that impact that. I find that particularly interesting.
Yeah, and I think I've always kind of looked at it from the human-centric standpoint and how is what we're doing impacting the individuals. And so what? What does that mean, right? I think that's my favorite thing to say is, okay, so what does that mean and how do we apply it and how do we use it? And I think there's a whole lot of things right now that are being put out there about the way people are working. But when you really dive into them, some of them don't hold water and some of them have huge implications about what we should and shouldn't be doing.
So let's dive into that a little bit. So tell me, maybe as background, where are you spending most of your time at HOK right now? Like, what does that look like for you today?
In an airport. would be where I spend most of my time physically. But I spend the majority of my time talking to our clients who are trying to figure out just where are we and what should we be doing. This is something that we've been talking about for years, is the way that workplace really is impacting individuals, but helping our clients really think about what's important to people. And it's not just about workplace. It's about how we are working today and how spaces have to evolve to really truly support that. So having lots of great conversations with our clients about all those things.
The first time you and I ever spoke, we chatted a little bit, and as you were talking about this moment and what you were discussing a lot with customers and clients, you described this as a Kodak moment for corporate real estate, and I thought that was such an interesting framing of the current moment we're in. What is a Kodak moment, and what did you mean by that in terms of where we're at for corporate real estate right now?
Yeah, I have to explain that now because, and we actually started talking about this 5 years ago. When I first said it, I had a bunch of young people in my office kind of look at me and said, "Are you talking about an Instagram moment?" And in our world, an Instagram moment is one that is such a cool picture. Like, where's the Instagram moment on the project? Where's that picture that is so cool? Everybody's going to want to get their picture taken in front of it and then posted it on Instagram. That is not what a Kodak moment is. Kodak actually invented digital photography and then didn't really think about how could they monetize it. That's not what their business model was. And so they kind of shelved it. And they literally almost never recovered from that after that, because they didn't necessarily see the disruption that it was hand. And I think that there are many, many signs that the real estate world and the way we deliver space is at one of those inflection points where there is massive disruption at hand. And we all kind of know it, but people aren't really doing anything differently. It's kind of like, okay, but we can't figure out what that means. So we're just going to keep doing things the way we've always done them. And basically somebody's going to come along, flip everything upside down, and massively change the way everything happens. And it's happening to some degree right now.
Do you think corporate real estate firms understand the urgency of the moment with regard to what you just described?
Well, it's which fire do you put out first? Okay, so there's so many fires right now in that world. People aren't going back to the office, and then you think about the building evaluations, and then you think about the sustainability issues. There's so many things, and then artificial intelligence, and what is that going to do? And just so many factors, I think, that are coming into play that it's hard sometimes for people necessarily to prioritize them and or even to see that, in a sense, they're all intertwined. And I think there's been this slow erosion of the old system that needs to evolve into something new, that the signals may not have always been really obvious. So one was, co-working, and the fact that so many people were willing to go pay to work someplace else and not necessarily be in their office. Or there was this whole notion of, when the pandemic hit, so many people didn't think they could work remotely, and now all of a sudden we can't get people to stop working remotely. And the notion that people can't get into space as quickly as they need to, that far too often we're starting from scratch, that really it's not necessarily highly sustainable. So I think that we are at a point that as an industry, we really have an opportunity to rethink everything, but that's daunting.
I think the slogan of "make this an Instagram moment and not a Kodak moment" is like a pretty good one, though, that maybe corporate real estate firms could hold on to.
Yeah, well, we could make that our pitch if you want to. Like, we'll put that as our slogan and put that on billboards everywhere. If you
maybe that's what we'll do. Title this podcast too. Be like, "Make this an Instagram moment, not a Kodak moment for corporate real estate."
Yeah.
So tell me. You discussed all of these different elements that corporate real estate firms have to think about right now, whether it be financial or what does an interior feel like, or the environmental footprint. When your clients come to you and say, look, we've got 12 different issues we're trying to think through, what do you tell them to prioritize? Or is there kind of a way of thinking about this that your clients have found helpful in simplifying for how do you start processing when there's so much upheaval?
Yeah, well, I will tell you that's one of the problems. Okay, so we literally have looked at everyone in our firm and said, if you are approaching projects the way you did 4 years ago, if you are designing open areas and or workspaces or gathering spaces or even private offices the way you did 4 years ago, you're probably missing the boat here. I think that traditionally we've gone in and we've said, what do you want? Right. And our clients don't even know where they are. Right. And when we say, what's your vision? Where, what do you want to accomplish? Again, their entire world has been flipped upside down. They don't even know where they are. And so it's really, really hard to tell you where I want to be when I don't even know where I am. And so what we really do is we approach this from a framing the possible standpoint, and we take our clients through an exercise, and they are coming to us for advice. We are giving it to them. And we are saying, look, we do this every day, 10 times a day for God knows how many years. And there are certain things that we know. There are some that we don't. And that we need to explore that with you. And we need to understand what your unique organizational DNA is, what your missions are, what you're trying to achieve. And then we'll tell you what the right approach to get there is. And I think that we need to really rethink how we're approaching all of our clients to help guide them, because that's what they need.
It sounds like it's even more fundamental than just a pure company strategy or firm strategy type of question. It's almost like what's your DNA as an organization, and who are you and your culture? Does it kind of go that far in terms of having to re-envision, or can it stay kind of more at the operational level in a way?
Yeah, no. And you're going to quiz me a little bit here, but okay, I'm going to pick up on the quiz. So we actually believe that every company has their own unique organizational DNA, and it's made up of 6 strands. And if you understand those 6 strands, then that gets you farther down the road to understanding what that client really wants. Because here's the problem. Everybody asks us what everybody else is doing. That's totally irrelevant. Okay, it's maybe nice to know, but what matters is what's right for you. Doesn't matter what Google is doing. Most companies aren't Google. I'm not even sure Google is Google anymore, right? And so I think what you need to understand is who you are. So those 6 strands of the DNA is, what industry are you in? Think about law firm versus tech company, right? Just instantly you can see, you start thinking differently, right? What region are you in? India, New York City, Kansas City? What work styles? What's your organizational culture? What's your demographic? Are you trying to get 20-year-olds or 40-year-olds? And what's your organizational structure? Are you a flat organization, or are you very hierarchical? If I know those 6 things about a company, then I can get like 60% down the road. Okay. Then I need to understand, what are your people actually doing? And there's a similar trait that we use to start to identify what are those personas, right? What kind of meetings are you really having, and what are you trying to achieve? What's your mobility level? Are you coming to the office every day, or are you never going to the office? And when you're in the office, are you sitting at your desk full time, or are you never at your desk? And so there's a series of questions that we can ask, probably about 6 about organizational DNA and about 6 about your personas, that if you answer those things for me, I can get you about 80% to what's going to be the right workplace solution. And then we need to dig in a little bit more and a little bit further to really kind of understand some of those other factors that are going to be influencing what's the right solution for you.
And some of those questions seem relatively straightforward on their face, but I imagine actually coming up with the answer might require a fair amount of soul searching or discussion just to understand who we really are in terms of the way we think about how we operate.
Yeah. And it's kind of amazing to me because a lot of people really aren't necessarily that in touch, especially with their sensory intelligence, but even just how they spend their day. And, we can do assessments and we can monitor and watch what people do. And then we ask them, and literally, most people say, oh, I spend maybe, 20, 30% of my day answering emails, when on average, it's usually like 60% of your day doing that, right? Or, oh, I'm at the office all the time, yet you only badge in once a week, right? So the information, we have to triangulate this, because people will say we need more data. Well, I'm going to say we have plenty of data. It's just a lot of the data that we have isn't very good data, and it can lead you down the wrong path. You need to make sure that you have thick data, that it's triangulated and it's vetted to really assess, is it actually accurate? And then we can make smart decisions.
And what are the data sources? Some of them I imagine, just based on what you described, can be things like your badge data, right? In terms of, okay, well, how often are people coming in? Although there's notoriously challenging to leverage badge data sometimes, or some of it
What if you come in to grab that donut and then you leave, right? And so you're
exactly.
there for an hour.
Yeah. But by the way, as an aside on that point, I always think that's one of the more challenging things around some of the office requirements that are starting to evolve. Like, what is 2 days in the office or 3 days in the office actually mean? Does it mean you come in for lunch for 30 minutes and that counts or not? It's complicated.
Well, let's just look at the really obvious one, okay? Like the most obvious one is productivity. And I just honestly, I believe this is such a red herring. If you ask most companies, how do you measure productivity? They can't tell you. And the way that most companies actually measure it is by how long you're on your computer. And I don't know about you, Rob, but there are days that I've spent 8 hours back to back on computers and felt like I got zero done. Totally. But my report would have told me I was amazing that day. I was so productive, right? But I got nothing done, right? And so I think what we aren't really thinking about is, what is value? Like what drives value? How do you define value? If value is closing a deal and I can do that in an hour, is the fact that I answered emails for 8, is that better? Like, which one does your company actually care about? And I think what companies aren't asking is, what do we truly value and how do we achieve that and enable people to do that more easily and effectively and repeatedly, not just sitting stagnantly on a computer all day, 8 hours, having the life sucked out of you, multitasking and making a ton of errors. Because what's happening right now is, yes, people are very busy, but they're busy creating crappy work because they're sitting on Zoom calls, multitasking, and the quality of what is being produced is dropping. Do you still think that's productive time? I don't think most companies would say it is. And so I think the whole entire conversation needs to change. And this is also saying that nothing else matters, right? Like social capital or longevity or mentoring and things like that. We're totally discounting that. These studies that will say people were less productive when they went back to the office. Well, of course, because I wasn't sitting on my computer, because I was actually talking to a human and actually engaging with somebody. But I don't think most companies see that as less valuable.
Yeah, totally. So one of the things I find interesting, and you were just describing this idea of shifting the way that we think about productivity and value as an important thing that maybe a company needs to go through or companies broadly need to do in this era. One of the things that always strikes me is in these moments of upheaval, these like Kodak moments, if you will, there generally tend to be significant winners and losers, right? When the foundation shakes, you basically create some space for people to either really gain or kind of really fall behind. I imagine that kind of like re-envisioning of how do you think about value is one of the elements that might be a characteristic of a winner. What are some of the other things that you think are going to really divide those who are successful in this kind of like reimagining, if you will, from those who maybe are really going to struggle?
Well, I think quite frankly, sorry to say this, I think most companies are going to struggle with hybrid working because hybrid is the hardest model to pull off. It is actually more of an operational model than anything else. And I think the real estate industry is being set up for failure right now. People are coming to us and they're saying, we need you to create this amazing space that people will want to be in. And that's not a bad thing to do. I can do that all day long. But if you're not supporting that with culture and retraining your managers and all the other things you need to do, having a beautiful space that nobody is coming to isn't going to solve your problem. And I think hybrid, most companies are not willing to put the hard work in to truly make it work. You have to think about, how do you make sure you don't have proximity bias? How do you retrain your managers to manage by performance or value, not presence? How do you onboard individuals and make them feel connected when they are kind of siloed? How do you ensure you don't create these silos? How do you make sure that you're tying people to that mission and feeling something more important than just themselves? And that's a lot of work that needs to go into that. And I think companies are going to stagger and stumble a little bit and maybe rethink some things and reassess or change course. And it's going to take a few years for this all to play out.
So if in some ways what I think I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, is if you're a corporate real estate firm and you kind of just take orders, so to speak, and a company says, I want you to do X, and you do X, and as a result, you kind of like perfunctorily almost like work through this, but there are other underlying issues that make hybrid difficult or might make that implementation hard. Does that still work for the corporate real estate firm, or do they actually have to change the way they think about partnering with companies or providing service in that regard? Like what has to evolve to help companies not just figure out their space needs, but also think about kind of like how do they succeed in an entirely different way of working?
Well, we have a whole series of questions that we ask people, and if the answer to no is no to most of those questions, then we're at a point of disruption, and I think we're there. Things like, can companies get in and out of space as quickly as they need to or want to? Most people sign a 10-year lease and then you're there. And by the way, the average life of a company today is 7 years. So the fact that I want you to sign a lease for longer than your company might even exist. And again, that's a lot of small companies, but they need space too, right? And so then what is the alternative? And the fact that we're starting from scratch, that every single time somebody leaves a space, the entire space is demolished and we start from scratch. Like when you move out of a house and sell your house, do you demolish the house and then start from scratch again for the next people that are going to be in it? No, because it's not sustainable and you can't flip it and it's just cost prohibitive, but we're doing that. Are we really creating great gathering spaces? Are we enticing people? Are we really addressing sustainability or equity? Are we making people better off when they come to the office and they can thrive versus just, sitting stagnantly at home? I mean, I think in many, many cases, we are not fitting the bill, and we need to rethink not only the process, but how we deliver it and how we work with clients to give them better options and choices that address the true flexibility that they need today.
So that stat, by the way, was fascinating. I had not heard that before, that the average company lives for 7 years, right, against a 10-year lease, which is just wild to think about. Are you finding as a result that companies are, I imagine they're very hesitant right now to sign any kind of longer lease? I mean, if you think about 7 years over last year's, do you think that's going to persist then in that regard? And how does that change the nature of what it means to think about buying or leasing space if companies are kind of moving through them or thinking in a much different time horizon than they used to?
Yeah, I think this is actually a challenge with the North American model. And in North America, we usually typically have the longest leases, and we build things out more extensively than anywhere else in the world. Like in a lot of other places in the world, they're building to the finished slab or the floor to the underside of a finished ceiling, and just the space in between. Okay, they're not going slab to slab. And so I think in the mantra in North America is, we're going to do this once every 10 years. We're going to spend a whole lot of money. Don't get it wrong. And so because of that, people have erred on the side of being conservative, which means that when they move in, they're probably not as progressive as they should be. And over the next 10 years, if they don't change anything, they just become more and more and more and more and more out of step. Okay, to the point that then they have to do something radical. In other parts of the world, you have people that are flipping their space every 3 years. You try something. If it doesn't work, oh well, we'll change it in 3 years. And so I think they have been able to be much more progressive than we have and to experiment with things. And I think we need to rethink that model, because can you predict what you're going to need in 10 years from now?
No, absolutely not.
Well, if I'm asking you to sign a lease and design space, and that's going to sit there for 10 years, what happens is the space becomes the anchor. And so here's another interesting statistic. Information is changing so quickly that technology, the workforce is changing every 5 years. They say that what you learn your freshman year of college is obsolete by the time you graduate. Okay. That the business itself is evolving really rapidly, like every 3 years, because, finance companies aren't just finance companies anymore. You're fintechs and you're
Sure,
this,
makes
and
sense.
we're constantly evolving, and technology is evolving every 6 months. Okay. But if the workplace stays the same for 10 years, it becomes totally out of sync with everything else. And it becomes not a great investment and a liability. And we need to be able to rethink the way we're delivering those spaces and how we're working with our clients to constantly rethink and evolve so that it becomes part of the solution and an asset versus that anchor that's just holding you down.
What's an example of a market that does more like 3-year leases versus 10? And is it just practice that's evolved differently, or is it structural? Like, what are the things that would have to change in order to enable that kind of thinking?
Well, so in a lot of cases, like if you're looking in Asia or you're looking in Australia, leases tend to flip more quickly. But it's also the whole model. They're not taking everything down to the studs and or to the core and then rebuilding it all up. They're tweaking what's in between the spaces and adjusting it. And often you're not taking everything with you. Like, you're actually leaving it there and you're coming in and out of space. So it's a very different model. Now, there's benefits to that. There's liabilities to that. And you have to counter and you have to weigh all of those things. You have to think about sustainability. You have to think about price and cost and, how bespoke is that to you? And I actually think what's happening right now is the middle is disappearing. We have clients that are going to own space. They want it very bespoke and very tailored to them. But then there's a whole lot of companies that just need to get in quickly, and they don't need it to be like totally customized for them. It needs to be good, but it doesn't have to be, excellent. Like, it doesn't have to be totally bespoke. They can't afford that anyway. And so think about cars or anything else, almost every other industry, we have figured out how to be able to reach different price points and to accommodate them with something that fits their needs. But in our real estate issue, we still have a challenge with that.
Are there any corporate real estate firms in North America that you can think of that you think are like doing a really good job at figuring out how to navigate through some of this, and maybe you're on the ahead of the curve, and what are some of the practices maybe that they're starting to put in place that are helping them take advantage of the moment in that regard?
Well, every coworker operator who is listening to this is screaming in the background, that's why we have co-working. That's why we have shared spaces, right? Like, I mean, that is one. And there is a market for that, right? It's not right for everybody. It's not right for a lot of people, but for some companies that either need to get in quickly, or they need swing space, or they don't know how long they're going to be there. It's perfectly fine. And as a lot of companies mature, and then let's say you don't sell or you don't get acquired, and you do sustain beyond that 7-year cycle or whatever that is, then you might go into more bespoke space. But I think that has given an alternative that I think is very viable for a lot of companies. And I think the other thing is that companies that have embedded the cost, it's not one and done, 10 years. Nope. They're basically saying we need to refresh our space on a regular basis to keep it relevant, up to date, and really truly functional and in line with us. And companies that are changing that model and rethinking that, I think, are having more success.
Got it. So it's not just the space for improvement on the front end or at the very end before turning over, but it's okay. I'm going to keep updating this along the way, where maybe I take more marginal costs maybe over the course of the lease in that regard, but it means that it's a lot less of this kind of step change that you have to make, which can be really painful at the ends of terms, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Just think about if you had to have the same iPhone that you had 10 years ago. Right. It'd be a radical change when you changed it, right?
With no software updates probably on top of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, any of it, right? Yeah. And I think, so the ability to get an enhanced model or to tweak it or to adjust it throughout and to have that embedded in your process and to plan for it in the beginning. I mean, we talk to our clients now about where are your refresh opportunities, where are the spaces that you're going to redo in 2 or 3 years to keep it fresh, to evolve it, or creating pop-up spaces or things that are meant to evolve and not just stay stagnant. And then there are other things, like it might be a tricked out conference room or some other spaces that you do want to invest the money in and that are going to stay that way for a period of time. You might update the technology, et cetera, but there, you have to have kind of that combination as a combine of that approach that I think is successful today.
So it sounds like that's an emerging, what you would think of as a best practice almost, is starting to think about the improvements and kind of staying up to date over the course of a lease rather than thinking about it just at the ends. Are there other best practices or things that you're starting to see evolve that you say, look, these are other things that any kind of corporate real estate firm or operator should be starting to think about in terms of how you evolve in this world?
I think the one that I got really excited about 10 years ago, and then maybe again 5 years ago, but sometimes when there's a great idea, kind of like with Kodak, people are like, that's great, but I don't know how to make money off of that, or I'm not really sure how that works. And that's not the way we do it. So we're not going to do it, right? One of those things that could change in our world is a furniture membership model or even an IT membership model. So who wants to own furniture, right? Because, in all honesty, people are buying furniture and then the next year they come out with a new model, but you just bought this. So it's like, is everything you just bought obsolete, and or can it keep up? And what if somebody doesn't like something? What if it doesn't work? What if there's a new model of something, et cetera, and you want to upgrade that? Do you have the ability to do that? So a furniture membership model is very much like co-working. You don't own space. You're a member and you have access to it. So let's say I need furniture. I'm going to go to you and you're going to provide me with furniture, and I'm going to pay you a monthly fee to provide me that furniture. But every year I can flip or upgrade 20 to 25% of that so I can refresh. Or if you come out with something great, I can be like, wow, that's great. I'm going to get that next year, right? Or if something isn't working, I can get rid of it. Or if my business changes. And then I'm not responsible for maintaining it and or disposing of it at end of life. And then other people, just like the used car market, there's a whole lot of people that drive secondhand Mercedes and they like that, right? Same thing with furniture. Why does it all end up having to go to a landfill? There are a lot of people that could really benefit from that great furniture that, by the way, most of that furniture has a 22 life warranty.
It's wild.
Yet
It's
it ends
almost
up in the
like
landfill.
it almost makes me think of it's almost like a mixture or a kind of marriage, if you will, of like a court kind of like rental with an iPhone kind of like upgrade program type of mix, like a furniture program. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think about an experience that we had kind of early in Scoop's history where I think we sublet somebody else's floor, and they basically included the furniture there for $1 because they're like, we don't want this furniture needed necessarily in a new space. And at the time that felt great for us. And then we ended up doing the same thing later where it's like we sublet a floor, if it was furniture for $1, and you have so much transaction cost around that it doesn't make any sense.
And think of how much more sustainable that is. And then you don't have the downtime of having to get it all disassembled, remove it, then have something that almost looks exactly like it come right back in. And you could do the same thing with technology. I mean, most clients are way behind on technology. And the reason they're way behind on technology is they're afraid to put a stake in the ground because it's evolving so rapidly. They don't want to make a mistake. Okay, they don't want to buy something that then they're going to be stuck with for the rest of their life. But if they could get in and know that you are going to provide me with the services that I need to maintain this and refresh it when I need it refreshed, then I think most companies would actually be willing to pay. You're going to pay a little bit more per month for that, but you're going to get something that is more relevant down the line. And I think we need to think about things differently today because I don't think the old ways are changing. I heard something recently that I thought was truly one of the most frightening things I'd ever heard. And it's an old saying, but basically it's something along the lines of, we are living in a time where things have never moved as rapidly as they are moving today. But they will never again move as slowly as they are today. There's something really terrifying about that because that basically means that, we really truly are in this period where just exponential change is just, going straight up. And we need to prepare for that. And I think my clients are always saying, help us be future proof. Rob, I don't know about you. I want the future to come because the alternative would really suck. But what we need to do is be future ready. And most companies are not future ready.
And it sounds like, by the way, I love that point, right? It's really just a moment to like step back for a second and think about even your own life in terms of like where you're at and like where the world is evolving. But one of the things that seems like a recurring theme, if I'm understanding in that regard, is we are structurally moving to a place where anything that allows you more flexibility on how long your lease is, how do you think about the permanence of your space, the permanence of your furniture, the tech that you use, right? Like it seems like there is a tremendous premium being put right now on the ability to evolve quickly, for lack of a better description, right? And so the companies, if I were to guess, the companies that do the best job adapting to that and helping their clients adapt to quick evolution are the ones that are going to do much better versus the ones that are peddling things the way they used to be with really long terms and fixed investments maybe are the ones that sounds like are going to struggle the most.
Yeah. And I think, look, even our definition of flexibility, I think, has to change. It used to be location, location, location. Now it's flexible, flexible, flexible. Okay. But forever, we have designed the office like people are potted plants. You go and you sit in one space and, the walls are supposed to move and the furniture is supposed to move and everything's supposed to move. But the only thing in that entire space that actually has legs that is intended to move is us. But we're designing it like we're these lazy creatures that just need to sit. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie WALL-E. We are so dangerously close to that right now. It's not even funny.
That's terrifying.
So, maybe what we need to do is, rather than expecting everything to change so that we can just sit there and become WALL-E, is for us to get up and move, to design different settings, different environments, and have us be the element that is moving and morphing and changing.
I love that. And what a scary future to be WALL-E. That's if there's any better dire warning to avoid, I feel like that's not where.
So close.
So
close.
So maybe kind of one last question, and then we'll do a couple of things and wrap up. But is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you're advising companies on to HOK that you think are particularly important on the topics that we've been covering?
Yeah, 1,000. We've barely touched ESGs. We've barely touched sensory stimulation and the fact that sensory processing, people are overwhelmed, whether you're neurodiverse or not. Everybody is being overwhelmed by what's coming at them today. We haven't really touched on the fact that we need to think really differently. Our contract with work has fundamentally shifted and changed, and the younger generation is looking at a very different prospect than what we were, and I think we need to acknowledge that. I think we need to acknowledge that for a long time we designed space for the average person doing the average thing. But I defy anybody to tell me today who is the average person and what is the average task. And so we've grossly oversimplified workspaces to the point that one size misfits all. And it's complicated and it's messy because we as humans are diverse and complicated and messy, and we're doing a lot of different things, and we need to embrace that. And I think we've tried just to kind of make everything so generic that we've done a massive disservice. And I think we need to address that as we go forward.
Well, if there's ever a moment to rethink how you operate and what the future looks like, it sounds like this is the one. So I really appreciate you spending the time and thinking through that. One of the things that we always do with every guest, just so people can get to know you personally a little bit more beyond the things we talk about, is we do a quick rapid fire. We'll ask you a few questions, give you just a few seconds to answer. Is that okay with you?
All right. This is where I'm going to totally fail, but go for it. Go.
All right. What was your first job?
My first job was catering when I was 10 years old at a wedding.
Wow. Okay. What is the best book you've read lately?
The Timeline of History.
What's that about?
It just tells you everything that went on in history, but like it takes it year by year or decade by decade and tells you this is what was going on here and this is what was going on here and all of this stuff. And it's just amazing to me how intertwined everything really is.
Interesting. I have to check that out. When you do video conference, are you typically video on or video off?
Video on.
Okay.
Except I just saw something about how unsustainable that is, because literally the amount of power it takes to have your camera on is really just off the charts. And from a sustainability standpoint, it's absolutely a horrible thing to do. But I think from a human connection standpoint, it's an important thing to do.
That's so interesting. And I have to think about that. One of the things I'm similar. I always do video on, but I've been trying to take more walks when I feel like I don't really need to be on video. And that way it's not uncomfortable than video off, but I could do it as a phone call, and so that's interesting, the sustainability angle of it. When you're in the office, what's your favorite snack?
Almonds.
Almonds.
Actually, popcorn. If I was on a desert island and I could only have one food, it would be popcorn.
I go through a lot of popcorn, so I'm
Yeah, love it.
on the same island.
Yeah.
What is your favorite piece of software for future of work or flexible work?
We've been playing with a lot of AI software lately that's frightening and invigorating all at the same time. I fluctuate between the two so rapidly. I think that's probably the one that's got me the most jazzed right now.
I imagine there's probably a lot of people who feel the same way.
Yeah.
Who is one future of work thinker that you really respect?
Um, I would go all the way back to Frank Duffy and just some of the early work he did. I think, he really set the course on helping people rethink or just, reassess and really dig into and have a deeper understanding about what we should be thinking about.
And one final question for you. For any listener who wants to learn more about you or your work, where should they go to find more about you?
LinkedIn is always a good place, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I will post things. Except lately, the only time I post something is if it's like something I'm excited about or something I'm really annoyed about. Right? That's when you like really get me. There's certain topics that if you put it out there, it's like, all right, now I'm coming at you, right?
Totally.
Or HOK.com.
Awesome. Kay, such a pleasure. It's so much ground that we covered, and I feel like so much more that we need to. We may have to do follow-up podcasts at some point, but this was great.
Yeah, thank you very much. Always great to have the conversation.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please also consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that helps other listeners find the podcast. For more FlexIndex content, including past episodes, our FlexIndex newsletter, and monthly research reports, visit flex.scoopforwork.com. See you next time.